Hey YouTube, it is your girl, Dr. J, the Midlife Writer, and I am here to talk to you today about driving in South Korea. I know that sometimes when people go to another country, whether it's on vacation or if you move there, you may want to drive while you're there. And so I'm going to give you some information about what it's like driving in South Korea, some of the laws, some of the differences, particularly between the United States, and some of the cultural norms that you just want to be aware of. Now, first, let me start out by saying it is monsoon season, so that is why my hair is looking like this. Like, don't blame my stylist, it's the weather. But beyond that, let's go ahead and get started. So, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is whether or not it's legal to drive in South Korea as a foreigner. And the answer to that is yes, but there are some stipulations. The first is that in order to legally drive in South Korea, you need to be 21 or older. And that is a little bit different than the United States. A little bit, but generally, if you're here just on vacation, you're going to be renting a car. And just like in the United States, a lot of times you have to be 21 or over to rent a car in the United States. So just look at it as that rule. One thing that is particularly different in South Korea than it is in the United States is that in the United States, you can get your learner's permit as early as 15 years old, and you can get your driver's license at 16 years old. In South Korea, you actually are not allowed to get your driver's license or anything like that until you're 18. And so that was a little bit of a shock and disappointing to my kids because all three of my kids were under the age of 18 when we moved here to South Korea. And so even though my 15-year-olds had their learner's permit and my 17-year-old had his driver's license, they're not legally allowed to drive here in South Korea. So if you are coming with teenagers and they want to get their driver's license, they will need to go back to the US in order to get their state issued driver's license, but they still won't be able to drive while they're here in South Korea. So that is something to keep in mind. In order to legally drive in South Korea, you will also need an international driver's permit. And so, what is an international driver's permit? You have your legal driver's license from your home country, and that driver's license then gets translated into multiple languages so that if you do have an encounter where your driver's license is needed, it's not, the burden is not placed on that country to translate your driver's license. It's translated for them. So you do want to make sure that you have that international driver's permit. If you're a United States citizen, you can get it at AAA. I think it's roughly about $25. And so you would take your legal driver's license, that is your state issued driver's license. You would take it to your local AAA office and pay the fee, and they will be able to give you your international driver's permit. And it takes, I think the process took my husband and I think all of 30 minutes, start to finish. So you want to make sure that you have that. And that's just good to have if you're going to be traveling abroad at all anyway, because it works in several countries, well, quite a few countries. So you want to make sure you have that. Since I was going to be in South Korea for a particularly long time, for years, I went ahead and I also got a South Korean driver's license. And in order to get my South Korean driver's license, one, I needed to have my state issued US driver's license, and it needed to still be valid and up to date. And then I had to take a 2-hour course, and then I had to take a test. It was a 90-minute test. There were 70 questions, and it was delivered in English. And I'm so glad that I did take the course because I learned a lot, and there were some things that I just would not have known if I didn't have exposure from that course. And I think taking the course really made me a better driver here in South Korea because there were some things that there was nuances to it that were different. And then some things were just completely almost opposite of things we would do in the United States. For instance, if you get into an accident here in South Korea, you are not to move your car at all, not 1 inch. Whereas in the United States, if you're impeding traffic, you're to move your car to the side of the road. You don't do that in South Korea. If you move your car, you get a fleeing charge on top of any other charges you were going to get, because it looks like you were trying to get away, or that you were trying to manipulate the scene to make it look like you weren't at fault or something like that. So you can get into significant trouble if you move your car after an accident here in South Korea. And I would not have known that. The other thing that I was glad I was introduced to in my course was the protected left turn. So in South Korea, you have an unprotected or a protected left turn. And what a protected left turn means is that there is a turn signal specifically to turn left. And what was different for me was the fact that South Korean traffic signals are all horizontal, and the vast majority of traffic signals in the United States are vertical. You have some horizontal, but not as many as you have vertical. And so it was like getting your mind around that. And then also the way where the turn signal is. And so in the United States, your turn signal, your specific turn signal, it either is that green light, it'll just be your green arrow, or it's right next to that green light. But in South Korea, it will be that turn signal is on the opposite. So you'll have the green, and then that green will turn red. But then, and that's for forward traffic. And then you will have, on the opposite of that, you'll see your green turn arrow. And so that's something that it's just, kind of like your eye doesn't really see that as a U.S. citizen, because it's so different than our traffic signals. And that's something that it would have taken a lot to get used to, and it wouldn't have been as intuitive for me if I hadn't already taken my course. And so I was really appreciative of that. Another thing is that you want to remember that pedestrians have the right of way in South Korea, and they do have, walk and don't walk signs. Not only are they on the signal where you'll see the person, if they're red, that means don't walk. If they're green, that means walk. Some sidewalks, they also have it on the sidewalk itself. When it's red, it'll light up red. When you can walk, that sidewalk bar will light up green, so that's really good. But even if it's not on green, you still want to know that pedestrians do have the right of way, and you want to be cognizant of that. South Korea does have a pretty significant pedestrian fatality rate, and so we don't want to contribute to that. So we do want to make sure that we are being conscious and cognizant of the fact that pedestrians do have the right of way in South Korea. So you want to think about that. Another thing that you really want to be aware of, particularly if you are a United States citizen, is that speed is in kilometers, not miles per hour. If you are driving in miles per hour, you are going way too fast. For example, if the sign says 50, that's not 50 miles per hour. If you are driving an American car, so if you brought your car from the United States here to Korea, your speedometer might still be in miles per hour. We have one car that we bought here in Korea, and then we have one car that we bought from the United States. So we have both. And so when I'm in the car that the speedometer is in miles per hour, I have to be cognizant of the fact that when I see 50, that's kilometers per hour, and that's 31 miles per hour. And so if I see 50 and in my head, I'm like, oh, I can go 50, I'm speeding significantly. So you do want to remember that speed is in kilometers per hour, not miles per hour. And when it comes to speeding and anything else, just know that South Korea takes its traffic laws seriously. A lot of enforcement is actually done remotely, though. And so they do have speed checks, and those speed checks are automatic. And so if you happen to just be driving down the street and you pass a speed check and you're speeding, you will be issued a ticket. And you do need to pay that ticket before you leave South Korea. You are not going to be permitted to leave South Korea until that ticket is paid. And so just be aware of that. You get a speeding ticket, you're going to need to pay that speeding ticket. And if you speed past a speed check, you will get a speeding ticket. So be cognizant of that and be ready for it. South Korea does have tolls, particularly on expressways. And so you want to know that tolls are paid in Korean won. There are some tolls depending on where you're going. Like if you fly into Incheon Airport, that's one of the bigger airports that people fly into from international flights. So if you do fly in internationally and you're going to, be driving from the airport, just know you're probably going to be passing some toll roads, and so you want to be prepared to pay those tolls with Korean won. And if you don't pay a toll, that's going to be a ticket, and you need to pay that before you leave the country. So those are some things that you definitely want to make sure that you are keeping in mind if you're going to be driving in South Korea. They also have a law like when you go to a red light, you can turn right, but you do need to come to a complete stop first before you turn right, because they do have some protected left turns. And so you will see a red light, and it might be because the people across from you have a protected left turn. When it comes to navigating around South Korea, I would recommend that you use the Naver app. Google Maps is not going to work for you in South Korea, and Waze app will get you there, but it won't necessarily get you there in an efficient manner. And so you do want to, I would say, definitely use the Naver app. When it comes to navigating around South Korea, you can set your Naver app to speak to you in English. Just know that there are a couple of streets that the Naver app won't pronounce for you. So I think because it just doesn't translate well into English. And so when you get to some of those streets, it'll just say, uh, make a, left turn at, and then it'll just be silence. And just know that you're coming up on a turn. It's just a word that was not easily translated into English for that Naver app. And so just, be cognizant of where you are. But I do think that you definitely need a, um, a map app as you navigate the city. And for an English speaker, Naver is going to be the best option for you when it comes to navigating around the city. Some people do use Waze because Waze is used, a lot of places more. It's used pretty commonly in the U.S. But like I said, Waze app will get you there, but you will probably not like the route. And so I would highly recommend using the Naver app instead of the Waze app. And then Google Maps is just, you're not going to get anywhere if you try to use that. So those would definitely be my recommendation for those. Now, I don't think that you necessarily need a car. When you come to South Korea, they have really good public transportation, and a lot of places that tourists would go is going to be walkable. If you're going to be moving to South Korea, it's up to you. The car prices are very reasonable, so it's definitely going to be reasonable for you to get a car, but just be prepared to learn some new laws, learn some new traffic laws and ways of navigating, because it can be very different when you come to Korea, particularly from the United States, is my experience. And just be ready for that transition. But Korean public transportation is really good, and you will not, it won't let you down. But you can drive here if you follow the laws. Just make sure you understand what the laws are. And also there are some cultural customs that are not going to be in any course that you might take. Sorry about that, but you do want to be aware of it. And so one of the most common cultural customs and norms, I would say, when it comes to driving is that um, there are some places in South Korea that are very population dense, and those population dense places don't always have population dense parking lots. And so there are times when there just isn't parking available, and sometimes when parking isn't available, people will park in no parking zones, and sometimes parking in those no parking spaces does impede traffic. It's not legal. Don't try it. But some people, they go for it. Some people who are South Korean, they will park in places that aren't necessarily parking spots. And so it can impede traffic. So what they will do is they'll do one of two things, and sometimes they'll do two of two things. And that is they will leave their car in neutral so that you can actually go and push their car out of the way so that you can get through and get to where you were going. I have not tried that because I still am very much in the United States mindset. In the United States, we don't touch other people's stuff for fear for our lives, particularly because I'm a Black American. So I'm really not going to touch somebody's stuff that doesn't belong to me. And so I have not used that method at all in any way, and I probably won't use that method. But just know that that is a cultural custom. And so sometimes if you're driving down the street and you're like, I can't get through this street, that person is in my way. Just know that that person has put some things in place so that they can be moved out of the way. The second thing that people will do, and or if they know that they're going to be impeding traffic, is they will have their phone number on their dashboard so you can call them and ask them to come move their car, and they'll come move their car out of the way so that you can get through. I have not done that either because I don't think that my Korean is strong enough to have a conversation asking somebody to come and move their car, but that is something that you will see. And that's why sometimes you'll go to turn down the street and it's like, I can't get down the street because there are cars in the way. How are you supposed to get down the street? Well, they've built some things in place culturally to allow you to still get down the street, and that is, you will, if the car is in neutral, you'll just push it out the way, or if their phone number is there, you can just call them and they'll come move it. My response when I can't get down the street is just turn around and go a different way. Thank you, Naver, for being able to redirect me to a new route very quickly, because that's how I approach those things, where I'll just turn around and go a different way. But there are some things that are put in place that are the norms for the community that people will do when there is a block in traffic and you cannot get down the street. Because there are some streets that are kind of tight for cars, and so you will see when you get here that South Korean cars, they tend to be a little bit skinnier than what you find in the U.S. And as you're on the road, you'll see that. You also want to know that South Korea, they sometimes have protected bus lanes, and so you're not supposed to drive in a bus lane. And so you want to know, what's a bus lane, versus what's a lane that I can drive in. So just those sort of things. So there are some things that you do want to be aware of before you come, if you plan on driving. But the big things are be 21, have a legal driver's license that's issued by your government, in addition to an international learner's permit, which is a translation of your driver's license. Know the laws, the local laws when it comes to driving in South Korea, and know that South Korea does use speed detection devices and red light cameras and all that sort of stuff. So if you violate the law, expect a ticket, and you will need to pay that ticket upon your exit from South Korea. And they also have amazing public transportation. And if you want to know about how to navigate public transportation here in South Korea, I will let you know that too. But if I can learn how to drive in South Korea, you can too. It's not that bad, but it definitely is an adjustment, particularly for this U.S. citizen. So I hope that helps. This is Dr. J, the Midlife Writer, and I'm out. Bye-bye.